Hello, welcome to the course End of Life Dreams and Visions, a research-based inquiry hosted by Hospice Corporation. My name is Betsy King, and I am the lead clinical educator for Hospice in the Macy Catheter. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Christopher Kerr. Dr. Kerr is the CMO and CEO for the Center for Palliative Care in Buffalo, New York. Born and raised in Toronto, Canada, Chris earned his MD as well as a Ph.D. in neurobiology. Outside of direct patient care, Chris's focus is in the area of patient advocacy. His passion is palliative care, and he believes that such care should be provided throughout the continuum of illness. Under Dr. Kerr's medical leadership, Hospice Buffalo now serves 1,000 patients a day, half of whom receive services prior to hospice. Dr. Kerr's background in research has evolved from bench science towards the human experience of illness, as witnessed from the bedside, specifically patients' dreams and visions at the end of life. Although medically ignored, these near universal experiences often provide comfort and meaning, as well as insight into the life led and the death anticipated. To date, the research team at Hospice Buffalo has published multiple studies on this topic and documented over 1,500 end-of-life events, many of which were videotaped. This work was the subject of his TEDx Buffalo talk, which has been viewed over 2 million times. It's been the subject of reports on the BBC, in the New York Times, the Atlantic Monthly, Scientific American Mind, Huffington Post, and Psychology Today. It will also be featured in an upcoming Netflix production and a documentary film to be released in 2020. Dr. Kerr's work was also recently published in a book released last month entitled Death is But a Dream, Finding Meaning and Hope at Life's End. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Dr. Kerr. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for joining me today. This talk's a little different. One of the things that we tried to do when we did this research was to videotape our patients and families, so there'll be a lot of videotapes. This work began a long time ago, approximately 20 years ago when I began at hospice. I realized that there was this whole subjective or inner experience of dying that was rarely taught in traditional medical settings. Yet it was so obviously important and actually therapeutic, not only for the patient, but for their loved ones. It's important to acknowledge that there isn't anything really new in this in terms of discovery. These sort of end-of-life events have always been discussed throughout history and across cultures. What's unique is that we took a different approach in that we tried to put some rigor to it and really define it from the patient's perspective. We also attempted to quantify this by using validated instruments and questionnaires. These are university-approved studies, so people had to be cognizant and aware. They had to prove their participation. It had to be witnessed. We also tried to do things like control for issues such as confusional states. So people were screened for delirium, etc. The other thing we did was, because these events change over time, we looked at it temporally. That is, as people approach death, we would interview them daily in our first study right up until death. So really, if you had to really capture what we were trying to do, was really humanize the dying process by looking at it less as organ failure, but more as a human experience that includes this remarkable dimensions of spirituality, of insight gained, of comfort given, of connectivity between and across lives. That's really quite remarkable. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the actual results. Instead, I'd rather have the patients and families explain these experiences to you through these videos. What I've done differently in this lecture is, for every patient, I've also included their family member. I mean, the one thing that hospice gets remarkably right is they treat people in the context of their lives, in terms of their families and their loved ones. And so what happens to the patient, obviously, at the end of life has enormous implications for those they leave behind. And that's true with these end-of-life experiences. How people die and how their witness leaving us has huge impact on how we process grief and loss. This first video is of a remarkable woman named Jeannie, and she's describing her end-of-life experience as defined as either these dreams or these visions. And a couple things you'll notice, they're fairly stereotypical. One is that they're described with remarkable clarity. She gives great detail to these events. She's also describing in a very interesting way. Thematically, what she's talking about could be a script for a horror movie, yet she's actually describing in a way with almost some detachment. There's very little said in the dream between the people who are in the dream and herself, but there's a great deal intuited or understood or felt. These experiences really don't deny the dying process or the inevitability of end of life, but really transcend it to something else. It's also remarkable, as you'll hear, how connected people are to those that they've left behind. So there's kind of thread that weaves between and across lives that comes out in these end-of-life experiences. So with that said, I'll introduce you to Jeannie.
I think more and more people are getting a little bit more hip to dreams than they were before.
When I think of my mother, I just think of a really vivacious, energetic. She was the type of person that when she walked into a room, it lit up. So when I walked in one morning, she said, I had the most amazing dream. And I said, tell me about it. And she said it was so detailed and so real that she felt that it was actually happening. And
I was laying in bed and people were walking very slowly by me. The right-hand side, I didn't know, but they were all very friendly and they touched my arm or my hand when they went by. But the other side were people that I knew. My mom and dad were there, my uncle. Everybody I knew that was dead was there. And they passed and did the same thing.
She described this as more of an event that she would believe almost happened. She knew that she didn't believe it happened because she woke up and she was at home, but she said it was as if she were in a different place.
Boy, I remember seeing every piece of their face. And I mean, I know that was my mom and dad and uncle and my brother-in-law.
That dream and her successive dreams and experiences made her feel comforted.
I felt good. I felt good to see some people. And the other ones didn't bother me either. I have seen my mother recently more. I can't say that my mother and I got along all those years, but we made up for it at the end.
And she said to me, I'm not crazy, Jewel. And I said, I don't think you are, Mom. It's okay. So
when I told my family that I was happy about it, and that's what they asked. How does it make you feel? Well, I feel good about it.
I feel the comfort and the peace that some of these experiences brought to her gave her exactly what she needed to pass on. For me, it affirmed that you're not alone when you die.
So that's Jeannie. As you can tell, she's clearly not confused, and it would be dehumanizing to dismiss these events as just states of delirium. You know, this research is complicated because obviously people, as they transition into death, obviously have altered mental status or cognitive function. What's really important is the vantage point. So we're not talking about the moments necessarily or the hours before death. We're actually talking days and months before death. For most of our patients in our original study, they were several weeks before dying, but we've gone upstream as far as several months. The other thing that's important to clarify is that this area of research is ripe editorializing. People often use the dying experience as a keyhole to look to the beyond, to the afterlife, the paranormal, the religious. This isn't that research. Well, all we were trying to do was legitimize the experiences of dying from the patient's perspective, the subjective experiences of dying, without trying to interpret it as something beyond. Our thesis is that dying is a mystery unto itself and should just be looked at in that context. The next video is of a gentleman named Paul, who's actually 3 weeks before dying. And Paul's interesting for a few reasons. When we looked at the content of what people were dreaming of, the common themes were obviously seeing the deceased. We actually measured how vivid these dreams or end-of-life experiences were on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most vivid, and the number it came closest to was 10. So these are described as very actual or virtual experiences, and that's why they come with such detail and such recall. In fact, one of the comments we hear the most is, I don't normally recall or remember my dreams, but I do now, or this is different. Oftentimes people are emphatic that these actually aren't like dreams. We call them dreams because that's the only nomenclature we have. When we looked at content over time as you approach death, what we found was that as you got closer to dying, the dreams more often or more had an increase in frequency of seeing the deceased. What was interesting about that was when we measure content relative to comfort, the most comforting dreams were of the deceased. So there's this built-in mechanism that the closer you get to dying, the more you're comforted by seeing or experiencing the return of people you've loved and lost. Another theme that is very common is travel. It's very interesting. We see all forms of travel preparing to go. But what's fascinating is people often don't get the metaphor. I mean, the analogy is clear. It's a transition sort of thing, but people often don't describe it that way. They just describe the activity. And that's really just an interesting observation in general. People don't come out of these experiences with questions, with need for analysis. They come out with answers and understandings, not necessarily a need to explore, or the time for therapy is over, and that's what this kind of follows. The other thing that's common is if people have had an experience that brought them close to their own mortality, like war, those are often re-experienced. So Paul, who you're going to see next, kind of covers it all. So he has the return of the person he loved and lost, which was his wife. He has vivid experiences of travel and preparing to go. And he also has a different vantage point with respect to his own experience with war. So here's Paul 3 weeks before passing.
My father is a remarkable man. He was 82 when he died. He was a fun-loving, very smart, very interesting man, interested in a lot of things and a lot of fun. But Dad was always dreaming about Mom.
I probably had 15 dreams about her, maybe, somewhere in there. She always wears, I dream in color most times, and she always wears a beautiful light blue. It could be a suit, it could be a gown, it could be a dress, but it's always light blue. And a couple of times she's gave me the little beauty pageant wave, and a couple of times she sort of greeted, always with a smile. Only one or twice I've ever heard her voice, but she always kind of lets me know that she's fine. I get that feeling after a dream like that.
My father's experience seeing my mother in his dreams was always good. He never, to my knowledge, had a dream where he was sad or unhappy when he woke up after dreaming about my mother. It was always good. She was always smiling. His feeling always was that she was letting him know she was okay, that this was good and she was all right. So
I had this crazy dream. I'm packing goods, and I'm setting him for some reason up high.
I never had any doubt that what he was dreaming was accurate and that he was reporting it completely to us and enjoying his dreams. He had dreams about his friends in the military. When he was in the Army as a young man, right after my parents got married, he was drafted and sent to Germany. And he would have dreams about his friends.
I'm at Fort Devens up in Massachusetts, where they were forming this company that we're going to oversee, a new company. And the guys are all young. They're like, I remember them, and I'm old, and I'm trying to tell them, guys, I've been here, I've done this, I'm not going to do it again. And they're arguing with me, and that's a crazy dream.
But the more I thought about it, the more I appreciated the memories we had of Dad and his dreams, and that we did take some comfort from that. I definitely feel that having those memories of my father's dreams and him sharing them with us keeps us connected, most definitely. My father's dreams definitely changed how I looked at him and what he appreciated in life. Most definitely. He got it down to what was important. His buddies and my mom, and not in that order. Mom, in a way, it makes me think, I hope that that happens to me, that some of my positive memories as a child, as a young adult, maybe as a young mother, will come back again to me, and I'll be able to relive them. This is a part of the whole process, and that when patients, when their family members talk about a dream, listen, because there's a great deal to be learned from what they're sharing with you.
So that's Paul and his daughter. An overarching theme, I think, that you can see as you're watching these videos is that there's an opportunity to really have a paradigm shift in terms of how we view the dying process. What we think of it tends to be so grim, what we observe physically and what we experience in terms of grief, but there's really this other element, and these experiences kind of highlight it, which is that people are actually brought together through their connections of love. And they're actually, these experiences, while they're, again, not denying death, they really affirm the life that was led. And they affirm it in terms of the relationships. And in doing that, somehow, the fear of death also seems to dissipate. Please notice that as you're listening to these folks, these people are not in distress psychologically. They really aren't. They're more put back together or made whole. One of the interesting things that we've observed time and again is that there's an editing process in these end-of-life experiences. And what seems to happen is that the people who love, nurture, or secure us best are the ones who reappear. And the people who conditioned, withheld, or compromised love and their relationships are often excluded. So there's this kind of final scale that's put into this process. And this brings us to the story of Beverly. Beverly is in the white gown on the left of your screen, and that's her husband. And there she's seen as a mother with her two children, Susan and Scott. So Beverly's backstory is important. She was raised outside of Cleveland, and she had a mother who was described as very strict, unloving, demanded a lot, and was very critical of her. When she would come home from school, she was often required to do menial chores, such as clean the legs of tables with toothbrushes, etc. Her father, with the name of Mentor, was the opposite. And he was very loving, affectionate, full of humor. And Beverly kind of survived her childhood by having two existences, one in the home with her mother that was compromised, and then another one outside with her father. And he was a mailman, and what they did every day is after school, she would join him in a clearing of the wood, and she would finish his route together, and that was their time together. And that's where she returns at the end of her life. And her mother is noticeably absent, and that again is a theme we see. The other interesting thing is this backstory is on the right-hand side are Susan and Scott. Beverly and her husband were unable to have children, so they adopted, and they did what people do, was they went to the orphanage and they looked for the healthiest, most vibrant and expressive child, and that was Scott. She was tormented after she brought him home for the next year because she felt that she had chosen the child who they felt they needed rather than the child who needed them. So she went back and picked up Susan, who is seen in the red outfit here. And Susan had actually been a child of rape, and her mother had tried to induce abortion by starving herself. So she was born premature and had multiple abdominal surgeries before she was taken out of the orphanage. And of course, what ends up happening is Beverly, at the end of her life, is cared for by Susan, who you're going to meet next. So this is the story of Beverly.
I tell everybody my mother was my best friend. We shared everything. There was nothing that we didn't keep from each other when I was having problems or whatever. I always felt that I was comfortable and can go to her with some of the things that often kids maybe not feel so safe talking about.
Do you dream about your family at all?
My dad.
Your dad?
Yeah. He was one of my favorites.
She woke up one morning and she said, I got to get the route finished. I said, oh, okay, what do you mean by got to get the, Daddy and I have to get the route finished.
Well, he was a mail carrier.
Okay.
And he would wait for me when he'd come home and I could finish the road with him.
And then this recurred a number of times. Okay, so like say the second time she would say, I have to help with the route. She would start using the names of the people who were in the houses, because after a while, the people who lived in those homes would come out to meet my grandfather, get their mail. And then so she would say, oh, well, Mr. Smith had this blue tie on. And I remember it always seemed like he had a blue tie on Tuesdays. Talk about it. It wasn't like it was past tense, even though I knew this was in a time frame in her past when she was younger, but she talked about it as though she were that age with my grandfather and telling it like she, was with him at that all night, and they'd been doing the route.
I did dream about us dancing, and they had taught us a new dance step. They wanted us to perform it, and I remember that.
It's a nice dream.
It is. Yeah. It's a wonderful dream.
She would describe the dress or whatever it was, and whoever it was that was playing, whatever band was going to be, at the supper club. And those experiences were real for her, and very empowering for me to see she's not frightened. She's not worried at all about what it is. This is joy and happiness. You always worry that they're in pain. And, what I realized was she wasn't in pain. She was living in these moments of joy. I think it's very easy, like, oh, they're drugged up or they're losing their mind. I never once thought my mother was insane or that these were like delusional or whatever. And it doesn't mean there's not the loss, but it made it, this is the pain that's filled with love and great remembrance. And I couldn't have asked for anything better.
One of the interesting things is that these end-of-life experiences seem to often address the wounds for having lived. Everybody's been harmed in one shape or form, regret, loss, etc. And those things aren't denied, but often addressed. A mother whose child ends up in prison, her end-of-life dreams, her parents return to her and validate her as the mother. In Beverly's case, she was grown up to believe she was the ugly duckling with two left feet. Her husband actually was Irish and very musical, and he brought dance into her life, and the two of them became dance champions that could clear the floor. So again, that's what she returns to. Back to this idea of how we view dying. Again, we view it as a lessening, as a diminishing of, and that again, that's largely based on what we're seeing in the physical dimension. But what we've done is really interesting. We looked at dying as post-traumatic growth. That is a negative or adverse, harmful experience from which you could derive positive gain. And when we did that, we published this study. People who were having end-of-life experiences actually showed positive post-traumatic growth. That is, while physically dying, they're spiritually and emotionally very much alive and actually gaining in terms of insight, adaptation, growth. And this is right up until the day of death. So it's not a passive process. It's very much a human process, which is often very rich in meaning. One of the unfortunate things about doing these formalized studies is that we have to exclude people who are cognitively different. And what's unfortunate about that is they often have very rich and meaningful in her lives. I think one of the things that we miss medically is we tend to talk about people, particularly dementia, in terms of their cognitive deficits or deficiencies, and that's kind of the nomenclature we use to describe or relay information about these sort of patients. What's missed in that is they often have a rich emotional history or tone, which is still very much experienced. One of the unfortunate things about doing this sort of work is in formal studies, we have to exclude people who are cognitively different. In other words, they have to be they have to be capable and have capacity in order to consent and participate. And that's unfortunate because folks who are cognitively different often have rich emotional lives and rich inner experiences at the end of life. In fact, generally medically, I think one of the things we miss is that aspect of people who are cognitively different. We tend to talk about them in terms of their deficits or defects, and that's the nomenclature we use, when in fact, again, they have rich emotional lives and tones and paths. This next story is interesting. This is Sue, and she's nearing the end of life, and she has very advanced dementia. And this is her daughter talking about her. And an event just happened just before her dying where she was trying to leave the nursing home. And I'll let her tell the rest.
So there was a lot of talk about, I had a dream last night and Gary was there, or Gary came to visit me, or we had dinner together. And she got to the point where she didn't even talk about it in terms of dreams. She talked about, I had dinner with your dad and Gary last night.
Your dad? Wow.
That was not every day. But probably 2 or 3 times a week within the last year or 6 months.
So pretty frequent.
Pretty frequent. And she was very animated about it, very happy. And she didn't even talk about them as dreams. To her, they were something that happened last night. So they made me feel wonderful because as I was getting off the elevator and thinking, I'm wondering what we're going to talk about today, because sometimes she didn't remember what they did during the day while I was at work, or maybe who else was there, but she always remembered her dream or vision or whatever she had. And when I saw her that day, I was like, Mom, why did you go outside? You never go outside. You know, somebody's supposed to go with you. And she looked at me like, well, I was going to meet your father. And I said, well, where were you going? How were you going to get there? And she just kind of looked around. Well, that wasn't the issue. The issue was that she was going to meet him. So then I didn't know what to say at that point, and I said, well, where were you going? And she said, well, we were going to Niagara Falls to get married. And life was different for her those last couple months because she had like something to talk about, something to look forward to. And those dreams were pepping her up, were making her happy, were making her almost look forward to go to sleep, which I think is great. Seeing that and being a part of it is a gift. And it was a gift for me. And I think it's a gift that should be shared. That at the end of our life, there's a lot of spiritual, emotional work that is being done and changes that are happening that, I don't know, are we too afraid to recognize it, or you think there's not enough time or whatever. But I think it's as important, if not more important, than the physical things that we have to check off on the chart.
It's interesting. So we live outside Niagara Falls, so it's a common thing for people who've gotten married there, and that's actually where she was trying to go to. So days before death, when you would think she was in distress, she was actually recontextualized and living the best, most happy day of her life, which was her wedding day. It's actually my favorite chapter in the book because the patients that are covered in that chapter truly immerse themselves emotionally in a better place and time and go to really their best self. And it's remarkable how, as she describes it, they were almost looking forward to the conversation because where she was placed in her mind was full of warmth and love. So I think those of us in health can certainly relate to this beautiful refrain from Dylan Thomas, this idea of raging against the dying of the light or the dying process itself. And back to this idea of kind of a paradigm shift, one thing I think you see as you're listening to the patients in these videos is that's not their experience of dying. They're actually not fighting against anything, but more towards something, more towards those they've loved and often lost. I'm very fond of this next video, which is of a gentleman named Horace. And a couple of things to pay attention to is that he's actually, in describing his inner experiences of dying, he is so overwhelmed with emotion that he's actually struggling to find words to give descriptors to what his experience is. And again, if you actually just focus on what he's saying and describing, you'll understand that there's not an element of fear. In fact, he's overwhelmed with warm emotion. So here's Horace.
There's this just mass green, like a pasture or green, green grass. But it's again hard to describe because it was a color green that I've never seen before. It was so vivid and so, it was like lifelike. And it just, it felt good. My wife all of a sudden appeared, and I'm thinking, well, this is even better yet. She had a certain smile about her that it was more like a joke. It was like I got you. And I'm wondering, what is the joke? What do you know? Why can't you talk to me? There's just no conversation.
Yeah.
Well, she was always beautiful to me. But she was even prettier. She was. She knew me inside out. Or maybe I guess maybe words weren't necessary. We just look at each other and knew exactly what one was thinking. It was just a good time. I don't know. But everything had left you, there was no problems. No, everything was happiness. It was like you wish the world was really felt good. Felt like there was. When you finish paying a bill, which have been bugging you for years,
relief.
It was that relief that it was gone, and it was, it was just a relief. Everything was okay.
One of the things that's important to point out, I'm showing patients who obviously are having very common, comforting experiences. and the vast majority are. But there is about 15, 17% of patients who have experiences which they categorize themselves as discomforting. And that's something we published in our original study. That was a really naive approach because there's better next questions. The discomforting experiences actually were often some of the most meaningful and definitely some of the most transformative experiences. And we have wonderful videos that demonstrate that. We just don't have time for them today. So yes, there are discomforting videos, but actually those are some of the most impactful experiences. So dying is obviously more than a medical treatise. This is a closing of a life, and it's not done in isolation. It's done again in the context of those we love and cherish. One of the important things that we've done, I think, is look now at the implications of these experiences towards bereavement. We've done surveys, I think, now numbering over 700. We published one paper with another one forthcoming. And if I were to sum it up quickly, what's good for the patient is also good for their loved ones. And roughly 40+% of families, even though there's nobody to translate what the patient is going through clinically, are witnessing these events, and they're overwhelmingly positive. When we actually looked at grief scales and grief processing, having witnessed end-of-life experiences actually very much helps people process their grief and loss. It's quantifiable, it's significant, and more importantly, you can just observe it. So here is a gentleman talking about the loss of his wife and her end-of-life experiences.
She started like chanting, "I'm going home, I'm going home," over and over and over again. And that's kept up almost all afternoon. I'd give her a drink or something, bring her bed up, and as I brought her bed up, her head would go up and still stare at the ceiling real hard. About, I'd say right around 3 o'clock, I said to her, "What are you staring at so hard up there?" She says, "It's the angels. They're coming down to take me home to heaven." And those were the last words that I ever heard her speak. She was total content. She had been fighting cancer for about 13 years prior to that there. And I knew that now she was at total ease. She's done. That was the end, and she realized that she was happy that she was gone.
And how did that make you feel?
It put me at ease also, knowing that. It's been hard at times to grieve her loss, but knowing how she died, what mood she was in when she died, has put me at great ease over it, really.
Now, do you think, often about that experience? Do you ever revisit it?
Oh yes, I think of it there a lot, and still, how I can hear her chanting over and over and over again. It's made me feel at ease, knowing that she was total at ease when she died. It wasn't that she was suffering or anything. She was happy that she was going, and the angels were coming to get her. Definitely has been ease as far as my grieving over her loss, knowing that, hey, that she was at ease when she died. Who do I want to dream of? Her waiting for me up at the gate. She's the love of my life, and I want to be back with her.
Is there anything else you would like medical professionals who take care of people who are dying to know about these experiences?
I think it's a field that really should be looked into deeply. That it's something that affects everybody. It affects everybody differently. The person that's losing somebody it affects, as well as the person that goes. And what their feelings are at the time has a great effect on the survivors, so as to speak. And to know that they went out happy, in a good mood, not suffering, hey, that's the main thing.
That's North. So there's a tendency to certainly romanticize the last moments, hours, days of life. And in truth, people often don't come up with great epiphany or insight, religious conclusions, etc. What happens typically is life gets crystallized to these very important moments in relationships that come back to surface. So the 95-year-old may have lost his mother when he was 5, but it's her voice he hears, and it's her perfume he smells. I think this next video really does that. It demonstrates that they're seemingly trivial events, but that they're defining in terms of one's relationships to others. And this is the story of the sauce.
So this is the one and only picture that exists of Patrick and I that was snapped by my niece at a wedding, because neither one of us are overly photogenic and it just wasn't our style. And this picture, because we did not live together, we each owned our own home, went back and forth for 15 years on each other's mantles. Patrick didn't cook with one single exception of making his grandmother's sauce, which he did, I want to say, about every 4, 6, 8 weeks through the entire 16 years I knew him. Patrick was the only member of his family that knows how to make the sauce. And for all the years I knew him, he insisted something was missing.
After his grandmother had passed?
After she had passed, and she had passed well before I had ever met him. I even tried to help him make it once, and I got banned from the kitchen because he insisted that an Irish woman was no way could ever make old-fashioned Italian sauce like Grandma used to make. Fast forward to, this would be the Sunday before he passed. He woke up in the morning and I couldn't get him to eat. He wasn't hungry, total loss of appetite. And I'm like, baby, we got to make you something for breakfast. What do you want? He goes, I'm full. I said, Pat, you had a snack pack pudding yesterday. You're not full. And he's like, oh, no, I ate with Nana Dolores last night. As real as I'm sitting here, he believed he made sauce with his grandmother the night before, said he could smell it, he could still taste it, he was full from it, and she showed him after all these years what he had done wrong, which is the very last step before you take it off the burner was to add a teaspoon of sugar. It was so very real for him, to the point, there I am, putting on sweatpants, driving to the grocery store, because we spent the next 7.5 hours, because that's how long it takes, making his grandmother's sauce that day. So, and he was so sick, and it was the only day I was ever allowed to help him. As he sat on the bar stool, and, well, let's say was very strict with the orders of the sauce, and we kept bringing the pot over, so there are certain things only he could do. We made the sauce, he added the sugar. Last time Patrick ever ate. Every morning he woke up saying, is today the day I'm gonna die? And I said, you'll go when you're ready. And he was ready.
He was ready. And you knew he was ready.
And I knew he was ready from this.
Yeah.
I think this is a man who is at peace, and very honest, if your last dream in life is about spaghetti sauce, there's nothing more peaceful than that. It didn't appear to be a memory. To him, it appeared that he was participating. And that's one of the things I found very different.
Did that dream help you accept that reality further?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. And not only the reality that he is gone, it's made me think of maybe there is something out there after we go.
switch and talk about children, which is difficult. We're fortunate here at Hospice Buffalo in that we have a very large pediatric palliative care program. We take care of approximately 100 children a day. The children that we've looked at in terms of end-of-life experience have not been included in formal studies, but we have published case reports. It's obviously different for a lot of reasons. Children don't have reference point for mortality typically. They don't have language in the same way. They also don't have regret in the same way. And one of the questions is if adults are so often comforted and secured by the returns of people they've loved and lost, what happens with children who haven't lost anybody? And what's interesting in several cases that we've written up, what returns them is animals, because everybody knows of somebody's pet who has passed. And the message and implication is the same, that they're not alone, that they're loved, and that they're going to be okay. This next video is of a young lady named Jeannie who's passed. I apologize if some of the questions seem leading in the video. What happens is we saw her in just a normal interaction, then went back with the camera and had to recreate some of the questions. But you'll notice a couple of things. So the video is actually edited because she mentions animals for a very long time. I think she gathers 6 or 7 various animals from birds to ferrets that she knew had passed. They return to her, they're living and healthy and vibrant. But the other thing she does is she secures herself in a castle. So here she is. And her mother also appears.
When I was sleeping, like deep sleep, my Aunt Miriam came down to bring me up to heaven, and she was playing with me with Barbies.
Okay. So when you saw her, she looked good?
Yeah.
Was she smiling?
Yeah.
Okay.
She had to wear...
She what?
She had to wear oxygen.
Okay.
Because she was very old.
Uh-huh. Did she wear the oxygen in the dream?
No.
She looked better then?
Yeah.
Okay. And you got to play Barbies with her?
Yeah.
Do you dream of any animals?
Yeah.
What type of animals do you dream of?
My cousin's dog that passed away.
What was the dog's name?
Moose. I see Daisy. That was my grandma's dog. Daisy. She passed away.
Okay. And so you get to play with that dog in your dreams?
Yeah.
What does all of this mean to you? You get to see all these animals. That's kind of neat, huh?
Yeah.
So these dreams, is it fun to go to sleep to think about what you're going to see?
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't scare you then?
No.
Okay. And when you see your aunt, where are you?
In a castle.
Really? Is it beautiful?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's huge.
Describe it for me. Are there other people there?
No.
Okay. Is it warm?
Yes.
Is it sunny?
There's a window that you can see the sun through it.
Uh-huh.
And it has God on the window.
Like a church would?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds beautiful. So this is a pretty special place.
And then there's a piano.
Mm-hmm.
And then a pretty painting of a baby, the little baby. Not a church.
Yeah, like in a church. In a manger kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the castle is? What does it mean?
Safe place.
Safe place. Yeah. Safe place, and it's sunny and it's warm. And your aunt's there.
And then they have a pool,
Really?
a built-in pool.
Ooh. You like to swim?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You nailed it. And you got the world's best smile. Is there anything else we should know about you?
I'm beautiful.
You are beautiful.
Right before she went to sleep yesterday, I heard her voice in the bedroom over my baby monitor, and I thought maybe she was calling me, so I asked her, "What did you say?" And she said nothing, and then I heard her voice again, and I thought, what the heck, who was she talking to? So I went in there, and she said she was talking to God, and that he was a very old man, but a very good-looking, cute man. And that he was going to make her all better. And that she was going to go live up in the castle with my Aunt Miriam, who she had been talking to as well. And that there was a big, huge bed there. And I let her know that we were all going to be there together someday, that Mom was going to come there too someday when it's my time. And she said, and God will make you all better when you get there.
What does it all mean for you?
Well, it kind of helps. I mean, sometimes I think it's real. For real? Are you really talking to God? I don't know. After the conversation with God and after my talk with her, she's been just She off and on would talk about the castle and how beautiful it was there. It was warm. There was a swimming pool there. And I still think about that all the time, because now when it rains out, I tell her, would you stop jumping in your pool, Jeannie? We would like some sun, thank you. It was a beautiful thing to hear because it just helped. Yeah. It doesn't seem like it because I'm crying, but it does help. Jeannie's dreams and visions have helped my grieving process. Most of the time. Sometimes I'm human and I'm doubtful, but I hear her in the back of my head all the time saying, "No, Mom, there's a castle. I'm waiting for you up here." It's helpful because I really, truly want to believe that there's a heaven, that there's something, that I'll see her again. Yeah. And because of how strongly she believed in it, I can't not believe in it. Sure. If we talk about regular medical doctors, I would like them to listen to the patients when they're talking about dying and death and dreams and visions, and they need to believe them.
The last slide I'd like to show is of a young lady named Sarah, and I'm showing this for a very specific reason, and it's this, is that accessing or encouraging dialogue about these subjective experiences is really a clinical modality or a tool or a therapeutic opportunity to access something else in the patient that can help them find closure, acceptance, and obviously it's a benefit to the family. This next video really focuses on a young lady named Sierra who was just recently transferred from a comprehensive cancer center into our inpatient unit and really hadn't crossed over from a curative to a comfort care model, and was really in absolute denial of what was impending. And the team that's caring for her, as you can see, is really at a loss because it was also affecting the care of the family, including her young child. And so that's where they get stuck, and I'll let the rest speak for itself.
Sierra was a 28-year-old African-American woman. She was diagnosed with colon cancer after what seemed like far too long between the presentation of her symptoms and the actual diagnosis. So she went for many months undiagnosed. by the time she was diagnosed, her cancer was already too far advanced to really make an impact or extend her life.
Sierra was very determined to do absolutely everything she could to fight her disease for her son, for her fiance, and for her family.
She was clearly not in the mindset of a dying person. She had little to no insight, at least insight that she would admit to, of the fact that she was nearing the end of life or even heading towards the end of her life.
Her family was not at all ready to see her go. They loved her and they wanted her to fight this as well.
After we had a meeting, a very touching meeting, where the son finally put words to what was the experience in the room, and that is the question, is my sister going to die? At that point, we decided that we better move the meeting into Sierra's room.
We all gathered together with Sierra. Her mom, her stepdad, her siblings, and her care team here at the hospice inpatient unit. Dr. Farrell was with her, speaking to her, trying to explain to her what we were no longer able to do for her medically.
During that time, what happened was something most profound, and that was that Sierra actually engaged her predeceased grandfather right in the room.
It happens every single time I talk about it. I get goosebumps. I get this sense of amazement and emotion to be there with someone when they experienced a vision like that. She saw her grandfather.
Afterwards, Sierra's mother said, "What did he say?" And he said, "I'm very proud of you. You are a wonderful granddaughter. You are a wonderful daughter. You are a wonderful mother." As the conversation was going on, Tammy asked Sierra, "What is he saying to you now?" He's saying, "I'm going to see you soon, and everything is going to be okay." At that point, Tammy said, "Listen to your grandfather." And it was at that point, really, that the family knew that Sierra's time was limited.
It was probably less than a week after that vision that she was able to let go and she passed. If we discount end-of-life dreams and visions, we're doing a disservice to our patients, to their families, and how they are able to not only experience the loss of a loved one, but how they then are able to grieve later.
I think she gained the comfort that she needed, not to give up, but to be at peace and let whatever was going to happen. I think her grandfather being there, of course, made it a lot more comforting for her. I think had Sierra not had those visions, I think she would have been more frightened. I think she may not have had that, I don't want to say easiness, but that I think she would have been more compelled to vocalize how frightened she was. But knowing that he was there for her, it made it very much easier for me, because I knew she would have him to be with and he would take care of her. It does help me process the loss, because I believe they visit us, both of them, You know, I think, you know, things happen for a reason. And yeah, she's not in pain anymore. And she's back to her healthy, playful, joyful self, you know. And he's there to watch over her as he did here. When it comes to dealing with patients who have these experiences, is not to dismiss their feelings and what they are relaying to you, what they've seen, who they're speaking with, because it's real. It's not, in my opinion, it's real. To them, it's real.
Just a couple of concluding comments. This sort of work is very difficult to get by an institutional review board or a university approval process. It's interesting. We tend to sterilize the dying process and inadvertently disconnect or dehumanize in it when ultimately it is a human experience. And it's kind of borne out in our work. What's fascinating is not a single person who was approached for the book, for example, for the research project said no. And what's fascinating in that is self-gain is obviously not there, but what seems to matter is this, right up until the end, is the dying patient is looking for meaning, for relevance, for connectivity, and that's borne out in this work. The other thing that's abundantly clear is none of it would have been possible without the construct of our model of care. You know, getting to know patients as people, their families, etc., only becomes because we approach the patient care from totality, from multiple dimensions and disciplines, and thankfully we're given the time to truthfully develop a therapeutic relationship and to know our patients again for who they are. So that's how this came about. If you have questions or inquiries, please contact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kerr, for sharing this enlightening conversation with us today. For those of you who would like to continue the conversation, we have created a new Facebook page entitled Insights on the End of Life. This is a forum for thought leaders, clinicians, caregivers, and patients to share their insights about the end of life, and we would love to have you join us there. The group's name is Insights on End of Life, and you can see at the top of the screen here the exact Facebook login. So please feel free to join us there and continue the conversation. In closing, I did want to let you know that Dr. Kerr can be reached on his website, www.drchristopherkerr.com. And this is a picture of the book that was just recently released. And I will have to say it's fabulous. I read it a couple of months ago and I can highly recommend it. So once again, thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us again in the future for another webinar.